All right, so we've discussed compounds and pseudoclasses. Next thing I want to talk about is the display CSS property. And what display allows you to do is play around with whether something is an inline element or a block element. Okay. So we've talked about this, many times. The concept that, HTML tags fall into one of two. Technically, there's three, but most of them fall into one of two categories. Something that's an inline element and something that's whether something's a block element. So an inline element is an HTML element that, when it's rendered, it displays in a line. So typically, these are a lot of like text related HTML tags like the strong tag, the em tag, strike through, teletype, stuff like that. So they will display in a line. Some elements take up the entire horizontal space. Okay, so they are a block. In other words, you can't have a block element and something else in the same horizontal space by default. It just doesn't work that way. So block elements are things like headings, h1, h2, h3, p tags, pretty much any container tag. So like div, section, nav, footer, main, that kind of stuff. All right, so here in exercise 3, I have a bunch of H2s here. And if I preview this, this is 1 H2, 2, 3. They're displaying as a block. Blocks mean that they go the whole horizontal distance. Block elements also, they adhere to all box model properties. That's things like you can use width or margin and padding. Down here I have some example of inline elements. Inline elements, like I said, would be things that display literally in a line. So these would be examples of, the em tag, strong tag, underline tag, things like that. Inline elements, when it comes to box model, are a little different. Inline elements ignore width and height. They don't apply. So for instance, here I have a bunch of em tags. If I went in here and I did a width of, let's say, 200 pixels, that's going to be ignored. Okay, so width and height are ignored. Padding top and bottom are ignored. Padding left and right actually work, but not padding top and bottom. So in other words, you can move things to the left or right of it, but you can't move things on the top or bottom of it. So for instance, let's say these are multiple lines and I wanted to put a little space here. Padding bottom in this case would not work. It would be ignored by the browser. So it's making this bigger, but it's not actually like pushing anything, you'll notice. The same is actually true for margin too. You can use margin right or left, but you can't use margin top or bottom. So if I did margin right, 25 pixels, that would actually work. So you'll notice here that this is the margin that I've added. But if I was to do the same thing for margin upper, top or bottom, if I say, let's say I did margin bottom, you'll notice it's not pushing those things up or down like it would if this was in block elements. For instance, if I came here and I did margin bottom 50 pixels or something of the like, and I went back, you can see how it's pushing things down. Okay. So that's just, inline elements and block elements as a whole, okay? We have a property in CSS called display. What display does is it changes the way that the HTML tag will display itself. So for instance, like I said, by default, H2 are block elements, which means they defaultly, stack vertically. Two block elements defaultly are never in the same horizontal space. But what I want them to do is I want these block elements to act like inline elements. So I can do that by going here and saying display inline, which means even though these normally would act like blocks, I'm going to say these are going to act like inline elements. And so now when I click, you can see that they're now displaying in a line. In fact, if I was to go look here under computed, display inline. Okay. I'm going to go and take a look at those EM tags. Now, EM tags are normally inline elements. I want them to act more like a block element, which means they would take up the entire horizontal space. The way I would do it is go to display and set it to block. Okay. So now that these are set as block, I'm going to go back and refresh. So these are, when I refresh this, oops, did I save? Yeah, let me try it now. There we go. Now these are acting like blocks. Okay, so remember before how height and width didn't work on these because they were inline. Well, now that they're a block, I could apply a width to it, like say 200 pixels. Okay. Lastly, so just for noting, hyperlinks are actually inline elements. So they defaultly display in a line, okay, like what's going on here. Now, the problem with that is, well, maybe I would want to make these hyperlinks a little bit bigger so that they're like a button. But as we've talked about, width doesn't work on inline elements, right? Now, what I could do is say, okay, well, let's make this into a block, because block elements do take the width and height property. So now these are acting like blocks, and they're taking that 200 pixel width to give them a width. The problem with that, though, is now they're being displayed vertically, okay? Because that's how blocks defaultly are. There are ways to change that, but by default, with what we've been talking about, this is what would happen. So there's one more way to display something, and it's called an inline block, okay? An inline block is an item that will use all of the box model properties like width, height, margin, and padding, but can also display in a line. Okay, so what I'm going to do is set this, rather than to block, I'm going to call it an inline block. I'm just going to turn this off temporarily. So first thing, it's going to display in a line. And now when I give it a width, it's going to work because it's acting like a block. I can give it a height too. Okay. All right, so all of this brings me to exercise 4, where we're going to create some navigation bars here. Okay, so let's preview this. So I have a nav tag here, and it has a couple of navigation links in it. These are all just different search engines, and I want to create a vertical navigation bar. Okay, so let's come in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say nav1. I'm doing this is a compound so that I'm affecting just these hyperlinks and not other hyperlinks in the page. Okay. And what I'm going to say is defaultly hyperlinks are, you know, inline elements. So for instance, I'm going to give this a background color of orange. Okay. And unfortunately, let's say they're a little too close to each other. So if I wanted to give them a width, let's say 100 pixels, it's not going to work because they're inline elements. So what I'm going to do is actually turn these into block. So let's use that display block. That's going to allow them to stack. It's also going to give them, so right now I haven't given them a width. So let's give it a width. So I'm going to give it a width of 150 pixels maybe. All right. And let's kind of tidy this up a little bit. I'm going to do like maybe a text align. And let's put a little padding on it too. Maybe like 10 pixels, something like that. I'm going to get rid of that underline by, that would be text decoration, none. And let's make the text color white just to make it look nice. Okay. This is my vertical navigation bar. And what I'm going to do is I want to have like a hover effect, just like we had when we were, going to the Diablo Valley, where there's a background, it could be a background color change or a text color change, just like, when we, I think it's gone now, but, if I had gone to Diablo Valley website, I'm getting this hover effect of light blue text, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this nav1a hover. This means when someone is over the hyperlink, let's change the background color from orange to red. Okay. So I'm going to go back. So now when I do a hover effect, there's my hover effect. I could change the font or the font color too. So maybe I'll make it like a light red. I don't know. Color light coral. Maybe like a salmon. That's probably not gonna look good, but oh well. There you go. If those hyperlinks are a little too close to you, you can put a little margin bottom on it. Because they're blocks, they should work. So let's do like, I don't know, 8 pixels. That'll put a little bit of space. That's that margin there. So you can decide what looks best for you. So that's one way. And that's nice if you want a vertical navigation bar. What if we wanted a horizontal one though? So I'm going to go and use the second navigation bar here that has some different social media links. So I'm going to go in here and let's do nav2a. And I'm just going to do like a light blue background. Okay. Now, if I did like a padding on this, because I want a little space, it's going to start looking a little... What's happening here is they're starting to overlap each other because they're still inline elements. Okay. I don't want them to be inline, and I actually don't want them to be block, because block gives me a vertical, and I kind of want this to be a horizontal. This might be a good instance to use a display inline block. So let's change these to a display inline block. All right, so now I'm getting that space, and everything's... If I wanted to space them out from each other, I could do that. This is where like a margin right or margin left would be good. Maybe a margin right of like, I don't know, 5 pixels, 8 pixels, something like that. Let's make it a little more, like 8. Once again, I'm going to make this look a little nicer. So let's get rid of that text decoration. Okay, looks pretty good. I still want to have that hover effect though. Oh, actually, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna do something where I'm gonna do kind of like that Amazon where you can put a border around it for the hover effect. So what I'm gonna do is say nav to a hover. So when you hover over one of these hyperlinks, let's add a little border. So border, let's just make it, I don't know, 2 pixels, solid, dark blue. Okay, so this is kind of like that Amazon one. Theirs was white, but now you might notice this is growing a little bit. The reason why is defaultly there isn't a border, and so we're adding a border, but only in a hover, so it's like pushing it out. So I'm actually gonna like, I don't know, the way to solve this is to actually have a border in its default. Now I don't actually want it to see the border, so what we're actually gonna do is say border 2 pixels solid. And then we're going to use transparent. Transparent means you can't see it. It's invisible. So it's the border's there. You just can't see it. So then when I do it, we don't get that weird jumping effect where it's adding those additional pixels on top of it. Okay. Or I could have done a background color too, if that maybe, I was just showing that, but maybe we'll just do something simple like a nice background color change to like yellow or something. I'll make the text color red. Okay. Final thing is you may see this. This is a pretty old school method where people would use an unordered list. And then inside the unordered list are list items, and then there's links inside of the list item. So you get something that kind of looks like this. What I'm going to do is we're going to convert this into either a vertical or a horizontal navigation bar. So the first thing we need to do is get rid of this. So what I would do is literally just kind of come in here and I'm going to say ul list to style or list style type none. That should get rid of that. I also need to get rid of the space. There's kind of that default, we talked about the idea of like sort of the built-in spacing and margin that's in your, it's part of your user agent. Your UL actually has that. If you actually click, see that little green to the left of it? That's a built-in margin or padding. So I'm going to get rid of that. The way we're going to do that is we are going to say padding left 0 pixels or 0. That should remove it. There we go. Okay. All right. Now what I want to do is we have this. Okay. And right now it's displaying vertically because list items are defaultly blocks, and each of my hyperlinks is inside of a list item. And if they're blocks, they're going to be displayed vertically. What I want them to do is display horizontally. So what I'm going to do is say, this means select all list items that are inside of a list. And let's use that display inline block. What that should do is do something like this. Okay. Now what I can do is start to, give this kind of a background color. So let's do light green and just text color green. I'm also going to get rid of that text decoration. Okay. This is where I could give it like a width, maybe like 100 pixels each. Margin right 8 pixels. All right, so what's happening here is, excuse me, I have this list item, right? And this is this has that width, the 100, but the link inside of it is still actually, it's an inline element. So it's only going to be as wide as the content inside of it. I want it to be as wide as this list item. So the way that we fix that is also to make these hyperlinks blocks. So I'm going to say display block. That should fix it. There you go. And let's start to kind of add some padding. So padding, I don't know, 5 pixels. I'm going to center these two just to be nice. Text align center. Okay. Once again, this kind of the setup. I want to set up a hover effect. So once again, you know, that's applied to the link itself. So I need to do ULIA hover. My normal is like a light green. I'm just going to change this to maybe like a nice dark green. I'm just literally going to type in dark green. And I'm going to change the color to, text color to white. Okay. All right. So these are all different ways of creating a nice navigation bar just through stuff we've learned. So essentially it's HTML, there's some box model going on here with like display and everything and, you know, margins and widths and everything. And there's some basic CSS, you know, color, background color, but really it's nothing that we haven't really talked about. We're just using it in a particular way. We got to think about how to apply this to get something like this. And so when you look at something like this, you know, this is, here, let's take a quick look at it. So where are we at? Oops. Yeah, so yeah, actually this is that one I showed you where it was a bunch of, this is a UL. This is an unordered list with a bunch of list items in it. And so if you click here, you can see list style none. And then the list items themselves, they're using something that's a little different here, but than what we did. But you know, they're basically applying it. There's many ways to set a navigation bar. This is using a slightly different method that I don't want to get into right now, but you know, it's still the same kind of setup here. Okay. Now let's take another quick one. Let's see what, so this is the navigation bar. Let's do a little inspector Rooney and this is the navigation bar. So you can see it's removing all of the padding here. They're using a slightly different method that we'll talk about later, but you know, there's like I said, there's many different methods. You know, you're going to run across a couple when you look at other people's sites, but I'm just showing you a nice, easy way that we can make navigation bars with just pure CSS and pure HTML. No other programming languages, no JavaScript, nothing else needed. Okay, so try that out. That was 3 and 4, please.